Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another video. Ever since I've said publicly that I am a prison abolitionist, I've fielded so many questions. Y'all have so many concerns, and I understand. I understand that it is really difficult to imagine what a world looks like if we completely divest from prison and policing. And that's kind of the point, right? Like, the point is that they have burrowed themselves so deeply in our psyches and in our communities that when we say, oh, maybe we don't need that, we have to question it. Like, what do you mean? Like, we're gonna be unsafe. Like, we're not gonna be able to walk out on the street. I get it. So I thought that now is as good a time as any for us to deeply explore this on this channel. So we're going to have a series of conversations about what it means to give up policing, what it means to give up prisons. This first conversation is going to be with Derecka and Charlene. They are two incredible activists whose work I deeply, deeply admire, and they're also incredible Black feminist thinkers. Just being in conversation with them was pure joy. It was a delight. And we really dive deep into not only what we're letting go if we choose to divert all of our resources away from that, the billions and billions of dollars away from that, but more importantly, we talked about what we gain. What would our communities look like if we put all of those resources into mental health care, into healthcare, into education, right? Because that is the real thing. It's not about how much less safe you're going to be. It's about how many people we can help, how we can get real social transformation by doing something different. This was a wonderful, generative conversation. I'm so glad that they agreed to do this. Here it is.
First of all, thank you guys so much for taking some time to do this. I know that this is a really crazy and emotionally trying time, so I appreciate it.
Of course, thank you for the invitation. Finally.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to y'all because a lot of people are seeking out political education right now. And I think some of those inquiries are really genuine and some of them are just superficial. They're just for show. But I do think that a lot of people truly want answers. They want to know what we should fight for, but they also want to know what is possible. And I thought I'd talk to y'all today about those two questions in relation to justice and prison abolition. So I respect your work. I appreciate your voices. I've seen both of you kind of discuss this recently on your social media, on Twitter, on Facebook. So I thought we could have a really generative conversation here. So the first thing I wanted to ask y'all was, how were you introduced to the idea of eradicating police and prisons?
So first of all, thank you so much, Kimberly, for having us, having me in this conversation. I was first introduced to the concept of abolishing the prison industrial complex, which includes the police and prisons and jails, the surveillance, all of these things, in 2013 when I met Asha Ransby Sporn at the Beyond November movement convening that led to the founding of BYP 100. I had never heard of the concept before. Asha was talking about abolition. I was like, what? I just never heard of it. And I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. And have been on a journey ever since to figuring out what it means for me, what it means for our people and our broader movement.
Wow, that's only 7 years ago. That's so great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Derecka?
Oh, I would say that I was in law school. So we were protesting in Ferguson. We would have this chant where we would go, indict, convict, send those killer cops to jail. The whole damn system is guilty as hell. I thought Charlene was gonna help me out, but she just nodded.
She's heard it.
I'm gonna hold it down by myself, I guess. Yeah, but I remember doing that because the movement energy at that time was around, like, making sure Darren Wilson was gonna get locked up and go to jail. And then by the time I got to law school, I was very fortunate to be around people who had politics that were much more radical than mine. I mean, like, who were just like already had read like lots of Angela Davis. I mean, I knew about Angela Davis because my mom would talk about Angela Davis as being like a Black Panther and had an afro, but I didn't know abolition democracy. I didn't know prison stops. I didn't know like her or really engage her work really until like late in college, but I still didn't even engage those texts. And so I was just fortunate to be around people who are much more political than I was. And through forming, it happened to form Law for Black Lives, just meeting lawyers who were like, okay, like it's important that we take on like political education. And so I just remember reading Abolition Democracy, just being like, oh, like, and then Our Prison's Obsolete, just being like, oh, like wow, like this is what prison, you know, abolition means. And then I just went down a deep rabbit hole through all of her work, to Critical Resistance, to Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, to Rachel Herzing, who writes more about police abolition than the prison industrial complex. I was just within the prison industrial complex, as Charlene explained. So just reading all of these Black women, and then, you know, Andrea Smith, who there's like interesting figure, but also still very brilliant, learning about all these people who are in critical resistance, Dylan Rodriguez, reading all of their, struggling through all of their work, and just being like, just shocked that people were having this kind of conversation like in the 90s. And the more I learned, I realized that these were like conversations that they had been, you know, in struggle with since like the 60s and like the 50s, and just been finding like your people, just like kind of finding your people. And it's comforting and affirming when something that sounds like police or prison abolition can feel overwhelming, but to know that, oh yeah, some of the questions that you think that you like are gonna get somebody on, that people have been struggling over that for decades. Like, what about the XYZ? What about the this? To think that you about to, yeah, it's like, oh right, like we can build to that. Like it's, yeah. So I've been really fortunate just watching our formation and our political formations shift from 2014, even 2013, like Charlene said, with that conference, Dream Defenders in 2012, watching a lot of us come into this space demanding like accountability and justice through incarceration. And we have all made political shifts to like abolition. I just think that's incredible. Like it's incredible, really. Yeah. You said just 7 years ago. I'm like, wow, where has 7 years been? Like,
what's also been a part of that is, I can't remember the person who said that we need to also like abolish the police from our minds, like for how we think. And that is not my quote, so don't nobody quote me on Twitter saying that as like the originator of it. But they said it, and it's how we treat each other, how we interact with each other, how I show up in my own life. Like that is also a part of the journey, because even, I say this all the time about prisons and jails, I think it also applies to police. If they were all gone tomorrow, we still have the habits, the beliefs, the thoughts, the instinct like that has been created. It's not even like natural, but it's like a response that's been created over centuries at this point. So we got a lot, as Grace Lee Boggs talks about, we have to have like revolution in our own selves.
Yes.
Yeah. Ooh. Can I give a quick example of what Charlene just talked about?
Yes.
My oldest, I mean, I went to law school when he was 6 months. He was about 6 months when Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown. So he's like grown up like under this like movement culture, right? So for the last few years, he's had like an interesting, like robust enough analysis around policing for like a 4, 5, and 6 year old. But it's gotten to the point where whenever his younger brother is watching something that is a cop car, it's a Paw Patrol, anything with a cop, he starts policing his behavior. And so what's interesting is that his like need to like control and like be in charge of like what his younger brother is watching, it's like, we're doing this wrong. Like, yes, like you have like the politics, but like maybe we should not like go immediately tell, ask if he's in trouble, do all the carceral logic that Charlene was just talking about. Because it's like, what I want you to have, it's like a conversation with him and say, hey, can we watch something else? Like, why do you want to watch this? Are you interested in this? But instead, he's so eager to tell me, you know, Garvey's watching Paw Patrol, Mom. And remember, it's a dog cop. It's a dog cop. And so it's so interesting. Even when you think you got it, you're just like, oh my God, like that's not it. It's also about ourselves.
Yes. Okay, there's already so much good here. So I wanted to underscore, I know that people are going to be looking for resources. So when you were talking about the first books, Derecka, that you read, you talked about a lot of work from Angela Davis. You talked about Abolition Democracy is Angela Davis, yes?
Yes.
Right. And Our Prison's Obsolete is like the classic text, the seminal text. I think that's always a great place to start for people. It's also not hard to read. Well, I don't know if I can, I did not find it difficult to read. I don't find it too jargony. Mm-hmm. Right. And I also think that, Derecka, you made such a good point about these are huge questions, these are huge ideas, and sometimes if you're sitting alone just thinking about these huge ideas, it can feel overwhelming. And I do think that as a Black feminist, as somebody who wants to have radical politics, I don't call myself a radical, I don't think most people should, but that we should understand that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Right? Like we're not starting from a blank slate. Like it makes me feel very good, and it's really reassuring to know that people have been toiling with this and debating each other for a long time. All right, so do you remember the concerns that you had initially when you were first introduced to abolition?
Of course. I mean, as a Black feminist, like there are so many things that come up. I was actually in a conversation, and I hope it's okay with her to name this, with Brittany Cooper. Maybe like a year into like beginning to learn about abolition as a campaign, a long-term campaign. And she was like, you know, the skepticism, or the concern that she brought up is a concern that I think a lot of people have. And it was actually the first time I heard it, was around people who are like survivors of or living with partners who are abusive. And what do you do with that, right? And from there, I took that question and that curiosity and started to ask more questions from that. And so wondering like, okay, so first, what happens when someone is being physically or mentally abused in their household? Who do they call now? The answer to that was like, actually, a lot of people don't call the police. Or when they do, and I have personal experiences with this, it doesn't actually address the root of the problem or the situation. Or what happens if, how do people actually go to prison in domestic violence or intimate partner violent situations? What happens, the other thing that comes up all the time is, what do we do with people who rape people or people who are sexually violent towards people? So then that led me to ask more questions and learn like, what is the other thinking? Derecka mentioned Andrea Smith was one of the people who founded Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. And they have sat in rooms and struggled with these exact same questions and helped us figure out answers to it. I think there's so much about ego that comes into, and like willingness to listen and like not assume that you know everything or that nobody else has thought about it, that has to come into play. I even think, and the other thing that I have to ask myself, and other people ask all the time, is like, okay, so how much are the police currently responsible for? They all up in the business. If I get in a car accident, I have to report it to the police in order to file an insurance claim. Why? Why I got to do that? So it's like some of those like questions about like, how are the police in my life? And what are alternatives to that? Like that, and honestly, I'm still asking questions about many things even to this day.
What about you, Derecka?
Charlene, the first two questions, what about the rapists? What about the murderers? It has shaped so much of like what I think about the politics of abolition. So one, like, I think Charlene is absolutely right. A lot of people who I know will like ask those questions are not genuine or not asking in good faith. They really think it's a got you question. As if like as if you're like, you know what? We were just trying to close all these prisons and just leave people just out here to their own devices. It just assumes that, you know, the struggle that people have gone through to resolve that, not just to think about it, not just to theorize it, but to practice and experiment, deep democratic experimentation, as if that hasn't happened. And as if it hasn't happened for like the experimentation for like over 100 years. And so there's definitely like an arrogance and an ego, and yeah, that's all there. The other side, what I usually get is like questions from like people in our families, right? When I talk to my mom, who lives in North St. Louis right now, she says, you know, people pay you to do that? Like, that's your job? Like, who's like, I don't understand how you that kind of lawyer. Like, when are you gonna become a real lawyer? Because the whole abolition thing, you know, this is someone who 5 years ago had a sign in her yard that was, we must stop killing each other. Those signs after Michael Brown was killed were everywhere, all over St. Louis. We must stop killing each other. And then last summer, you know, the police killed a teenage boy in front of her house. Shot a teenage boy and paralyzed him in front of her house. And she called me, and the first thing she said is like, these MFers gotta go. I'm like, Mom, who are you talking about? I had no idea who these gotta go. I get it, like I get it. And I was like, so we went there, me and the executive director of Our City Defenders, which is like a legal defense organization in St. Louis. And she was just like, we just don't feel safe. Like, we don't feel safe from police. We don't feel safe from our neighbors. We don't feel safe from our partners. We don't feel safe for our children. Mm-hmm. And so think about that. The primary institution that you're supposed to be able to call to respond to that violence can't solve that violence. They beget more violence. So then what happens when the person is arrested? They go to a violent place. They endure more violence from like the people who they're incarcerated with, and then people who run the prisons, the administrators, the guards. And then we release them to a society that's adding more violence. And often, guess who homes they're going back into? Usually Black women, usually their moms, their grandmas, their girlfriends, their partners, right? So then it's like, well, what do we care about? Like, obviously we should absolutely try to figure out how to stop harm, right? Mm-hmm. If we care about reducing harm, and we want Black women or all women, trans women, people who suffer the violence of this to like not experience that, to be free, then we have to be committed to a politics of abolition. If we want to punish the people who are hurting them, then we should probably think about punitive logic. But I think that most people who are committed to Black feminist politics will probably choose liberation and freedom and safety, right? Like, that's the world that we want. And so what is it going to take to get there? The same thing with sexual assault. Like, what are we going to do when people commit sexual assault? Like Charlene said, ask more questions. The question I usually ask is, why do people sexually assault people? The same reason I ask, why do people usually kill people? If I kill someone because I'm homophobic, the police can't do that. They can't make me less homophobic. Trans women experience and report like 60% of sexual assault from police officers. And so if we are not trying to undo a homophobic or a transphobic culture that makes people so like have such animus towards people who they think are different than them, then why would we keep putting resources into a force on institution where that culture permeates? The Minneapolis Police Department, I found out when I was reading this report a couple of days ago, had at one point was the most homophobic police department in the country. That was the reputation. The reputation as police department, right?
How do you measure that?
Different police departments measure in different ways. I don't know if it's because they were attacking like people who were queer more than other people. I don't know if like the language they were using. I know when I think of like police departments that are particularly brutal, I don't have like a particular methodology, but I wasn't sure. The report is from MPD 150, which is an organist-based collective in Minneapolis. The report is like bomb. It's really good. I think you should check it out. But they were talking about how there was just a history of like so much discrimination and assault against like people who are queer. And people who they assume we're queer, right? And so it's like, well, if we want to stop people from killing people, we have to figure out how to stop people from being homophobic, transphobic, racist. Like, that's part of the work of abolition, and not just like, we need to put all of our problems invested in an institution that creates the same kind of problems that we're trying to undermine.
Mm-hmm. So I think most people can be transformed. I really believe that. I say all the time, I wouldn't be a feminist if I didn't think people could change. But am I convinced that everybody can be transformed? I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. So I think a common question is, okay, so we completely transform our society to directly attack the problem and not the symptom of the problem, but there's always going to be some people that you can't get to. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do with those people?
So here's the thing. I love this question. This is one of my I love talking about abolition. Like I especially with Black people. I love it. And the thing is, the abolition of the prison industrial complex is a long-term campaign. Transformation is a long-term thing. And before we even get to that, like 0.00005% of people who can't be changed, imagine if we took the time to even start, right? More of us to start and get into the process of doing that. And what it looks like is like transforming power in our communities. Who makes decisions about our schools right now? In Chicago, we don't even get to elect our school board. Our mayor elects our school board. Who provides public mental health care services for people? All of Rahm Emanuel, our previous mayor, closed down I think all of them or nearly all of the public mental health like centers in the city. Who decides like what communities and neighborhoods are invested in and which ones are not? Like all of those things are part of the project. It's saying what we shouldn't be doing is spending, in Chicago's case, like $4 million a day on the Chicago Police Department. What we should be spending is that money in our neighborhoods, on the south and the west sides in particular, right? And so I think we have an impulse that I understand. I understand an impulse to say, well, what happens when we get there and we still have all these people? The reality is abolition is not necessarily a project to end all violence or to say that no harm is ever going to happen again. No conflict is ever going to happen again. No violence is ever going to happen again. What it says is we are going to deal with these things drastically differently. And in dealing with them differently, we actually transform the way that we relate to each other, and the things that people are doing to each other, if not ending, they will drastically be reduced, right? So many of the things that people report and experience, thinking about theft, right? Thinking about what else happens. I don't know. We can even start there or what have you. But so many things are connected to poverty. And I'm not talking about the men and women and folks on Wall Street who steal from us every single day and will likely never see the inside of a prison cell. I'm talking about like the everyday things that happen with people that the automatic response is lock them up.
Yeah.
If someone steals my car, I want my car back. That's what I want. I want my car back. The police don't get your car back. My car was, shout out to St. Louis, but my car was stolen in St. Louis when I was living there. The police didn't give me my car back. I got nothing in return. I want my car back. That person going to prison for stealing my car does nothing to address it. And perhaps I want that person who stole my car to help buy me a new one. It's just, there's so many things that are a part of that. And so I want us to, yes, imagine that world and not say that world is one that's like completely free of all harm and violence, but that we are like dealing with each other and relating with each other in different ways, and actually possibilities for some semblance of justice are actually possible.
Yeah, yes, literally every single word, except the little shady shout out to St. Louis for the car. But besides that, everything. I think that one thing I'll add is that the people who at least I study and like talk about, dream about abolition around, I think one reason why they reach back to the abolitionist struggle from like the 16, 17, 1800s is because what they realize is that there were a lot of the same sort of questions, right, that caused a similar, like, I don't want to use the word paralysis, but just like, well, if we can't figure out what to do, like the Negro question, what to do with all these Black people, is it worth like the freedom? Like, is it worth the pursuit? Is it worth the try? If we don't know what the fate or ultimate destiny of Black people are going to be, then like, is it worth figuring out whether they should be slaves today? Mm-hmm. Right. And that to me is just like, no, like niggas still ran. People still left. They still rebelled. They didn't know if they were going to get citizenship, right? They didn't know if they were going to be free as a people. They didn't know what their fate were. They ran. They left. They experimented. They tried. They created maroon societies, right? Now, we know today, in 2020, the abolitionist struggle then didn't change all the hearts and minds of white people. Right. There's still obviously lots of like individual racist attitudes, institutional racist practices that still permeate our society. But imagine if we hadn't abolished slavery because we were afraid that every single white person wasn't going to change. All three of us would still be in chains. We wouldn't be on Zoom. We wouldn't be Zooming nothing. We would be all in chains, right? So it's just like, how can we use that imagination and will, which is two words that have been like sticking with me in this particular moment. What is our imagination and what is our will? Because we can't use what are we going to do about every single scenario to get us somewhere. We have to start running. We have to start trying, I'm in this class right now. And they're talking about, you know, the different kind of abolitionists who are part of the struggle. They were like the running abolitionists, and they were like the writing abolitionists. They were the orators. They were the people, if you read Stephanie Kemp's work, Closer to Resistance, they're people who were on the plantation who knew they weren't going to leave, but they quilted patterns, right? They braided freedom routes in people's hair. They sang songs. They prepared meals. It took so many type of ways for people to imagine freedom, right? But the other thing that had to happen, like, frankly, people had to, like, die. Like, a lot of the people who were, you know, in positions of power had to be constantly challenged, right? People had to, like, realize that times were changing. And it just required so much of, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, there just was so much commitment over what ultimately had to happen around the fate of Black people, that I just don't want it to be the case, because we don't have an answer for a society that, we're not even saying utopic, right? We're not even saying that this is like once we're abolitionists, we're going to be like free of all harm. I love that Charlene said that, because a lot of times I hear that as a critique, like, oh, so we just going to be perfect, huh? And it's like, no, it's a different way of relating to each other, a different way of relating to communities and institutions and the planet, right? It's reordering our relationships. And that's what justice is. Because right now we have prisons and police because we need institutions to violently manage inequality. So it's not just removing those carceral institutions, it's also rearranging the social order. So we don't need police to protect property. Like, that's why it's a conversation around, how do we relate to private property? How do we relate to capitalism and exploitation? Right? If someone is in a domestic violence relationship because they can't leave their partner because they're going to lose insurance, that's not freedom. If we don't abolish that arrangement, then we have to, like, figure out what violent institutions are going to be in place to maintain it. So it's a complete reordering of relationships that we can start by having, like, really practical next steps.
Yeah. So I think a big hurdle for a lot of people is fear. And I'm not really here to say whether or not those fears are legitimate, but I think a hurdle a lot of people have is when you compare prison abolition to the abolition of slavery is, well, Blackness is weaponized, but actually Black people are not, in and of ourselves, we're not dangerous people, right? Allowing us to be free does not necessarily cause white folks to be in greater danger. They imagine that danger, but that's not a real thing. I think a lot of people are saying, okay, well, you open up the prisons, rapists are out there, serial killers are out there. These are people who a transformed, a reordering of society ain't going. So how can I feel safe knowing that we have abolished the system that is supposed to keep the serial killers away and keep the serial rapists away? How can I feel safe in my home? How can I feel safe walking down the street?
I think those are all valid questions to ask. And I think it's okay for people to feel afraid and skeptical and confused as to what the hell we talking about. I think people who are calling themselves abolitionists, particularly in this moment, I think we all have a duty to invite people and engage people in conversation. When people are like genuine, like, I want to know like what you're talking about, what this thing is, not people who are doing it just to be, you know, adversarial for the sake of being adversarial. But I think we have a duty to come at it in that way that's not condescending. So that's the first part for me. The second part is, I don't know, and maybe y'all know some Black women who feel safe in this country. Every day I'm concerned. I live in a highly policed neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, and I am still afraid of experiencing sexual violence, of my stuff. I'm not afraid of getting my stuff yanked, because that happens. That's a thing, having things stolen. I live in constant fear and concern of being physically assaulted or sexually assaulted in this country, in the world. The police have not like helped me feel safer. Having cops up and down my block, the main street near my house, does not make me feel safer. And what do we do with the rapists and the murderers? What are we doing with them now? They're out on the streets right now. They're in our homes. They're in our faith institutions. They're in our places of employment. They're in our educational institutions. They are everywhere. They exist. In most instances will never go, they are not reported. And let's not even get into the number of rape kits that are backlog on backlog on backlog in this country. It's unconscionable. So what if we spent our time, our best thinking, our resources in figuring a different way out of this? You know, we cannot regulate. I saw the 8 points put out by Campaign Zero and Derecka. We cannot regulate our way out of police violence. We actually can't do that. And I don't care. I said it on Twitter. I'll say it here. Those 8 points ain't it. Not gonna get us closer to where we need to go. We need fundamental power shifts. And power, in a very simple way to understand it, are organized resources, meaning money, land, all those things, and organized people, right? And so we actually have to reorganize how money is arranged in this country, and a part of that is defunding police departments. And we have to both organize political leadership and people in our communities differently, so we can yield or leverage our power in different ways. Because right now, so much of the power sits with police departments. And so in order to shift that, we can't just regulate them more. We have to do so much more than that.
Absolutely. And Kim, the question is, it's like a lot of questions I have about continuity and discontinuity around slavery, and what do we lose by using an abolition analogy the whole time, and what do we gain, right? And so I remember reading, there's a chapter in Black Reconstruction where Du Bois is just Black people were still in a lot after slavery. They were still in a lot because they didn't have no money, and they didn't have no land, they had nowhere to go, and they had been exploited, and they needed to eat, and they needed to travel. The economic arrangement before Reconstruction started popping up was such that Black people remain in a permanent, semi-permanent, permanent place, so that they can continue to be exploited. And so that's interestingly where I see a continuity. It's not that Black people weren't inherently criminal. They weren't stealing because they were Black. They were stealing because they were formerly enslaved and they didn't have anything. And so to think that the white people not feel safe, yeah, they didn't feel safe because they were getting their stuff stolen. They were being knocked up beside the head, left and right. They had every reason to not feel safe, because when you create a structure and invest in a violent structure that keeps people unequal, people are going to take your stuff. And so we have to ask a question, why are people taking your stuff? So you can keep building prisons, keep building police in order to stop people from taking your stuff. Or we can think about how to rearrange all this stuff so people don't take in the first place, right? And so I think that's just so important. And Charlene mentioned the Wall Street example. It's the same with Flint, right? So if I pour poison in someone's water and they drink it and they die, I would be charged for trying to kill them. If I decide to poison water systems because I want to make sure that the white area is able to get better water, filtered water, and give lead pipes, I get a fellowship at Harvard. That's what literally happened. So even the way we think about what's criminal and why we're safe, it's so much reliant upon what we choose to criminalize. So all harm, it shouldn't be considered criminal, and everything that's criminalized isn't harmful. And so we are so nervous of people who are inside of cages, because when I used to go to church in Kansas City, the pastor, I didn't agree with a lot that he said, but he used to say this thing: there's the caught and the uncaught, right? So the people who are caught, who are in prison, the idea of letting them go, it feels oh man, we're not going to be safe. We're putting dangerous criminals on the street. But as Charlene also mentioned, there are lots of people who unfortunately still causes a lot of harm. So if we care about harm, do we care about harm more than we care about punishment? That's I think one of the fundamental questions of the abolition, right? And so when everyone was angry at North Carolina around the trans bathroom bills, trying to ban that, I remember arguing with people I used to go to church with, look, you're much more likely to be, a victim of sexual violence by someone in your home and someone in your church than you are a stranger in the bathroom. So what's the logic here? What is the fear coming from? Is it fear because we've criminalized sexuality, we've criminalized gender for some people? Is that where the fear is, or is there something actually that you're afraid of? And if it's harm, then you would do much more organizing to probably get someone in your house locked up than someone who you don't even know or never meet.
Can I follow up on some things?
Yeah.
Okay, so you said something that really stands out for me around everything that is criminalized is not harm. It's not like people aren't experiencing harm. So like when I hear you say that, I think about Saidiya Hartman's book, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments. And she talks about basically the criminalization of Black women and girls in like the early 1900s in New York City, Philadelphia, and a little bit in Chicago, but mostly New York City and Philadelphia. And literally, we oftentimes hear about like vagrancy laws in the South. We hear about like if Black men were standing on the corner, they have a job, they would be locked up, end up on a chain gang or convict leasing system. Wayward Lives talks about literally Black women and girls just walking down the street being yanked up by the police and being said that they were doing what we now call sex work, right? But we know they used different words back then. They called people prostitutes, Jezebels, Sapphire, all kinds of things. They even had a law like the Wayward Act. And depending on your age would determine how much time you got in prison. And they called it a reformatory school, but it really wasn't. It was a prison by just a different name. And Black people from slavery, from the during chattel enslavement through Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction up until now, the ways in which gender and sexuality have been criminalized have been practiced and perfected on Black people's, like through Black people's lives and behaviors. And so today where we see the Black trans woman who's walking down the street and this has actually happened, this is not just a rhetorical exercise. Black trans women can be walking down the street and they'll have been arrested and assumed to be sex workers, whether or not they were. And frankly, even if they were a sex worker, they shouldn't just be scooped up because that is who's being harmed? How are you being harmed by somebody walking down the street? Somebody being out after a certain time of night. But this is how Black people have been criminalized literally for centuries in this country. You ain't have your papers. You got like, who do you belong to?
Yes.
You don't have a job. Why don't you have a job? Which is really who do you belong to? Because your job was either like working land as a sharecropper or working in somebody's home as a domestic or doing laundry. The question was still about who do you belong to? And now it's like, it's these things that are people who don't have homes, like, or houses, how unhoused people, you're criminalized for that. You have a mental breakdown in the middle of the street. Who is called? The police are called, not a mental health care worker. So there's so many things that are criminalized that don't cause harm, but absolutely fill up jails and prisons across this country. So I just wanted to follow up on what Derecka said because it's so important, that point, particularly when it comes to Black people.
Yes, okay, such good points. So I have a question about, is it ever difficult for you to maintain ideological consistency? And I ask that because I do not believe in prison. I don't believe in policing. I don't believe in prosecution, tear down the whole system. It's not going to solve our problems. But sometimes I do want people to suffer. And I have a difficulty reconciling in my heart and in my spirit, you know, those punishment urges, that logic of carcerality being like, well, if you, like, we'll use Amy Cooper, right?
I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
Amy Cooper is the woman who called the police on Christian Cooper, the bird watcher, and purposely, you know, used the shrieking, you know, delicate, fragile white woman voice, right? And people are like, well, she needs to face some consequences. And I'm like, she does need to face some consequences. And if we extract carcerality out of that, what are the consequences?
She just gotta get in the gloves and fight somebody. Like she just I would say something else that's less politically correct, but I feel much more comfortable saying we just gotta pick someone in our movement to get in the gloves with her. She just gotta do that fight, man.
I mean, so here's the thing. Amy, she lost her job, right?
Yes.
She lost her job. She has been shamed internationally, definitely nationally. People know what she has done. She has been embarrassed. her entire character has been torn, like decimated. If that's not a part of punishment, I don't know, or if that's, even if not punishment, I won't say those are punishment. I don't think you losing your job is punishment in this case. I really don't. Consequences. I don't think anybody can say with a straight face that she has not experienced any consequences. What I appreciate about what you said, Kimberly, is that it is so, I think, human to want people to suffer when you have suffered. And I think like abolitionists would make a mistake to sit here and say, there's something wrong with you for wanting someone to suffer when you have suffered, right? And so it is, to me, that's an opening for a conversation of what does it even mean for you to receive, what is it that you need from this? What does that look like? I think it is an invitation for different questions and different answers to come up here. Like, this woman, like, could have gotten this Black man killed, right? Amy Cooper, Christian, the NYPD, we know they trash, could have showed up and could have done what they did to Eric Garner. Like, I feel like that's in the imaginations of so many people. So what do we want from Amy? We want Amy to lose her job. If Amy is arrested, right, even if she goes to jail, say she does, she gonna come out one day. Or is she there forever? What has that done to create conditions so that what happened to Christian Cooper doesn't happen again? That's what I'm concerned with. Where are we putting resources into, where are we putting resources into so that Amy Cooper doesn't feel like, the Amy Coopers of the world don't even feel like they can make that call, and don't even feel like they'll be rewarded by NYPD or the police showing up to handle this Black man, or as our dear Hillary Clinton told us, bring him the heel. Like, how do we create those conditions in this world so that kind of behavior of Amy's is not rewarded? And that's our work. But you're like, oh, but what if it happens to me tomorrow? If it happens to you tomorrow, it's likely that Amy ain't finna be arrested. She ain't finna be arrested. What is possible though is that she might get dragged for filth. She might lose her job and never have to, never be able to show her face in public again. And so what else do we want besides that? So I think it's about the long term and then also like the right now.
Yeah, I mean, I already told y'all what I wanted. Rachel heard it and she said, people think abolitionists are all pacifists, and I am not a pacifist. But besides that, to add one more point to what Charlene just brilliantly articulated, whatever Black people in particular think they're gonna like win or get by demanding the criminalization of whiteness is gonna come right back on Black people. And so after those two, Black men were in Starbucks, were like arrested, and I started seeing calls to criminalize like 911 calls, I was just like, okay, look, I know that like you want people to pay for the harm and potential harm that they're going to bring to Black people. But trust, if we look to criminalization of that kind of behavior, it's not only going to be the false calls from like white people or gentrifiers, it's also going to be Black people, Black grandmothers, Black people who live in their neighborhoods and don't know how to get a group of kids off their corner, because that's who's going to get criminalized too. That's going to be a false 911 call too. And even the impulse may be different for the Amy Coopers and the other people who are legitimately afraid of like Black people who may even be in their own community. The way that our criminalization system works is that it's going to fall harder on Black people. It's going to fall harder. So get another example. I am do you ever feel conflict? Do you ever feel, when I see that cops are like being arrested, I'm just like, okay, like, all right, like it's complicated. I don't feel like, woo, like we out here. Like, I don't feel like that. And at one point I did, but it's happened so few and far in between. I don't like really like feel that. Even when I was thinking about the Buy Anita campaign, or when Bob McCullough lost his job, his prosecutor job in, St. Louis, was I happy that they lost? Absolutely. Was I happy that organizers didn't endorse another prosecutor? Yes. I was like, okay, this is where like living in between that tension, right? But for the people who are like demanding that cops like, go like, prosecute these cops, if you notice, the cops who have typically been prosecuted have been cops of color, right? That has been Peter Liang. It has been Daniel Holtzclaw. It was the Black police officer who killed the white Australian woman in Minneapolis. So interestingly, like the whatever like criminalization wins that you're going to try to get with these arrests, I guarantee you is going to come back harder on poor people, people of color, people who are queer. Like, that's how it works. So it's like, it may provide temporary relief, excitement, what's elation, like all of that. But long term, we're like justifying, legitimizing a system that the burden, it always comes back hard on us.
I mean, you brought up Mohammed Noor, who was the Somali police officer who killed Justine Damond in Minneapolis. And I was doing some research, doing some reading about that case in order to prepare for this. And something that I thought was so freaking fascinating was the Somali community surrounding Mohammed Noor and saying, y'all let cops kill Black people all the time. Why can't this Black cop kill? And I was like, whoa, like this is
It happened in New York City around Peter Liang. They were like, so wait, it's racist. White cops can kill people and Black people get away with it, but if an Asian cop kills Black people and get away with it, it was framed as a racial justice issue.
Yes, it's such a mind fuck. I was like, yo, this is crazy. Yeah. So I do think that there's a really valid concern, and something that I thought about, I don't know if this statistics is right, because I just saw this on a meme on Instagram, but I think it said something like only like 0.3% of police officers who kill like get convicted or something like that. Does that sound,
No.
Okay, something really minuscule.
What we know is that at least 1,000 officers kill people every year, right? Mm-hmm. We know of those officers in the last, it's in one article that I wrote, like in the last 5 years, like 5 or 10 people have been convicted. So like rough math, that sounds about right? So more police officers have been arrested, convicted, and indicted in the last like 5 years than like in the past like 50 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's still like tiny, like it's tiny.
Yeah. And I guess my question about that was, isn't it possible that on the really rare occasion that a police officer gets convicted, it almost feels like they're just throwing us a bone, like, damn, like, y'all not happy? Like, this one person, like, justice, look, the criminal justice system works for y'all, like, take it.
It's wild, because, you know, the cop who killed Laquan McDonald, Officer Dyke, he was indicted, and he was convicted, and he is in jail. And he got like, what, 6 to 7 years? And people are like, oh, that's not enough. And I'm just like, just spent all this time calling for this man to go to prison. And that was the primary demand for many, not all people, because many of the Black youth-led organizations in that time, we were calling for the resignation of Rahm Emanuel, the superintendent. We were calling for Anita Alvarez to go. We were calling for the same thing people are asking for right now, to defund CPD and invest in our communities. We were calling for all of that. And people were feeling like weird around the demand to call for him to go to prison. So that was not one of our forward-facing demands, even though, you know, people felt differently. And we also, including myself, like, I don't believe in telling families, like, you're wrong for wanting somebody to go to prison. Like, that's not the move. That's not the move. And I would not get on anybody's anything and say, we shouldn't be making this call. Like, don't make that call. I just don't think it's appropriate in the thick of it. I can tell you what I believe in. And so we spent all that time doing that. And this is what some people wanted the most. And it happened, and it still wasn't enough. And so what if we just did something different? We did something different. The Chicago Police Department has the city of Chicago, has put out literally tens of millions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating. I'm gonna get the exact number, lawsuits before we get off this call. But we've put out, here it is, $113 million in police misconduct lawsuits in 2018 alone. That's it, $113 million alone. And that is wild. That is ridiculous. That's what we're spending to get on police misconduct lawsuits. We could talk about the ones where they've killed people as well. And I'm sure that's probably included in that number. But like, y'all, our visions have to be bigger than let's lock them up, because our people deserve more than that. I know I'm tired of paying for it, frankly.
Yes. I was literally thinking about Jason Van Dyke. I was thinking about the cop who killed Oscar Grant. He had like 3.5 years, 4 years in special protection in prison. The Peter Liang, this is the most I've talked about him in one day. After he was convicted, the black prosecutor, the prosecutor's office asked if he couldn't get any time. He didn't go to prison. I said, wow, these prosecutor offices are getting real abolitionists around cops. So he didn't even go to prison. You know, Ray Tensing, who killed Sam DuBose, the University of Cincinnati police officer, the prosecutor tried twice to convict him, twice. And both times people absolutely said, we refuse to convict a police officer. You know, so do I think they're throwing us a bone? I mean, yes, I think that what is happening, and it broke my heart that the lawyer who represented, what's the white woman's name who was killed by Muhammad Noor?
Justine Damon.
Yes. So the lawyer who represented her said, you know, of anyone who's been killed by the police, she was the most innocent. That's what he said. And he represented, I can't remember the name of the black man who he was also representing, was another, I think Terrence Crutcher, it was another high profile killing. He said she was, of anyone, she was the most innocent. So then what happens is that it puts the pressure on the public to start deciding which cop actually deserves a certain kind of punishment based on how guilty or innocent we perceive the black persons who have died at their gun. That's on us. So the video of George Floyd on the ground, knee on his back, that went viral, it's like, oh man, he get that work, the 3 cops about to get that work, because this is just insane. But the 6 cops who watched Jason Van Dyke shoot Laquan McDonald 16 times, or the other SWAT officers who entered into Breonna Taylor's home, it's like, what do you mean if anyone like actually deserves it? And so the logic of it is still putting us to make decisions about, you know, whose life is worth defending and whose life is worth issuing punishment against the person that kills them. And that we have to do that. We can't do that. We have to reject that.
That's right.
So I think for a lot of people, the impulse to punish, when we're talking about inequality, because, you know, like white folks do different stuff, but I think that when we're talking about marginalized folks, the impulse to punish people who have transgressed us is rooted in rage. And that rage is legitimate, and I don't want to minimize it. So I am wondering, what do we do with the rage? If we're not going to put it into punishment, then what do we put it into?
Kimberly, I have to go back to, we usually don't get to put it into punishment. Most people are like living in this world, having been harmed by other people and have never gotten any kind of punishment didn't happen. They just had to take it. And so a lot of people are walking around enraged with things that have never been punished before. And for those who have, where some punishment has happened, you know, I'm not here to tell people how they should feel when they've been harmed. And I don't think we are yet at the place where I can wholeheartedly advise people to go one way over the other. I can't tell you to do that right now because I actually don't have the resources to provide to you the things that you may need in this moment. I don't have them as an individual, and most of our organizations don't have it either. However, people are trying. People are trying to create those things. And frankly, they're not nearly as resources they should be because most of our money is being spent on things that are rooted in punishment.
Yeah. And
so I won't sit here and lie to anybody and say, you know what, I got the solution to your pain. I don't. Black people's pain, this is also, I don't know why I ain't talking about reparations, the project of reparations for descendants of chattel slavery and colonialism, I would add globally. Globally, we all Europe and this country, these people here, they owe everybody. They just owe everybody. And that is required to deal with the things that have hurt and harmed us. Period. Everybody don't even have access to mental health care. Everybody can't go to a therapist, right? Everybody don't have that. Everybody can't take a couple days off of work because something happens and they need just a moment. I just think of all the small things that don't exist that people have called for, like paid sick leave and affordable or free mental health services, childcare, because these kids are working your night and you need a moment, like whatever that is. I think of all of these demands as things that should be funded, should be provided for. And one of the beautiful things about it is that when Black people demand stuff, it's usually not just to benefit us. It's usually not just to benefit us. If we win, like, you know, the Compete River Collective said, yo, if we were free, if we as Black women were free, it would require the destruction of all systems of oppression that everybody else would be free to. And that's how I see it. I honestly see it that way. Like, we shouldn't be selling people hoop dreams that suffering is going to end. What we can say to people is that this suffering is happening, and actually much of the institutional suffering that is happening, we can end a lot of that.
Yeah.
You know, but we ain't gonna end it through punishment. And as Derecka has mentioned over and over again, carceral logic.
Well, what do you do with your rage, Charlene? I'm interested. I'm sure that you get mad. So where do you put that?
I have so much. A lot of it, like, honestly, I feel like the tension in my shoulders right now is like it goes into my body. I have a lot of gray hair. You can't see it. You can't probably see it all on here, but it shows up like physically for me. I'm carrying rage from like movement stuff, things that happen within movement that like just are allowed to happen. I carry rage from like the outside world. And so I channel that into organizing. I channel it into writing. I channel it into physical practices. I channel it into some spiritual practices through being in community with people. I get acupuncture. I pray. Sometimes meditate. Literally, I got at least 20 different tactics to address my rage, and I still hold it. And I really think it's like nation building or build, like you got to use every tool at your disposal to deal with the thing, because the world we live in right now is not set up to remove all my rage. And I'm gonna be mad about something next week. Yeah. I'm gonna stop talking. I feel like I'm talking a lot.
That was really good.
Derecka, did you have any thoughts?
About what I do with my rage?
About what do we do collectively with our rage, and what you do individually with your rage?
Well, I know what y'all can do. If someone tell y'all to go vote, y'all can curse them out. That's what y'all can do with y'all rage. Don't let no one tell you, "Oh, you angry? Go vote." Just be like, "Bro, get out my face." That's what y'all can do. I don't know. I think I'm really sitting with what Charlene just said about like noticing what other people are doing, and the hour is interesting, because not all Black people feel rage right now. Not all Black people like their rage is manifesting differently. Some people are in the streets right now burning things. Other people are like deciding to spend more time with their families. It really, really, really depends. And it's just interesting listening to Charlene. I was like, wow, like me too. You know, when I get stressed, I notice my eczema like flares up, and I have breakouts like all on like the crevices of my hands, and I'm tired. My appetite's gone. So interesting. A lot of that stuff is just out of my control. So it's like, you know, having accountability with people close to me, just like, hey, have you eaten today? Because outside of all the political stuff, you have the personal stuff that is political. Like, you're trying to help family members. You're trying to like figure out how to be responsive, like, to all the fires and things you're dealing with in your own personal life, while, you know, society feel like it's on fire. Mm-hmm. But in terms of our collective rage, I always point people to organize, to join communities. I feel like being, you know, on social media, it can feel like therapeutic, like sending stuff out into the world. But I really, really think for people who have rage and or interested and thinking about how to like move in the world, I emphasize collectives and communities so much, like so much. You know, for a lot of us, it takes these spectacular acts of violence to like get our attention, to pull us into a struggle. But if we're gonna stay there, you know, what's gonna keep us there is having certain kinds of community, and that's hard. Like, I also don't romanticize community. It's why I'm not sold on like community control of police. There's nothing inherently progressive or like romantic about like being with other people. But I think once you find your people, right? Once you find the people who you can struggle with and have conversations with and cry with and fight with and be like, I don't really feel like going into the streets today because I don't want to get sick. Or, yo, can you give me some masks because I'm trying to go outside? I think it's about finding like your people and loving and studying and struggling with them, as Robin D.G. Kelly says. You know, that's deep. In terms of how I deal with my own rage, I love protests. Like, I get a lot of energy surrounded by people who are also angry. I get like, it feels like festivals. It's like, it feels like radical festivals. That's maybe like a weird analogy, but I went to a protest the other day and I was just like, wow, there's so much art out here, so much anger, so much frustration. It's people who like are on like the dirt bikes doing circles and everyone started rushing. And you had the elders being like, see, y'all getting distracted. It felt so funny. And I was like, wow, like I also haven't seen this amount of people in like 5 months. So I didn't even know what to do with myself. So I was just like, just in awe. What else do I do? Oh my God, yes, writing. So like if something is in the world that like I feel like is just inside of me, it literally will keep me up tonight. Like it will keep me up. I can't sleep unless I write. I have so many email drafts just like to myself about stuff in the world. So many things. I'm like, oh man, I should like try to get this published, but I'm like, no, like this is really for me. Or I'll send it to some like friends who I think are like thinking about something like similar, or people I think could push me on something. So writing has been huge for me. Also becoming like a student of social movements, like really, really, really trying to like do deep study, especially with people who I think are also curious about all the lessons that we could have learned, like had we only taken the time. Like the protest of policy stuff that happens after every movement, I'd be like, damn, like we've been saying protest of policy for like 70 years. Y'all didn't know? Or like, how do social movements relate to electoral politics? It's like, well, we know, like what lessons are we learning? Like, what are we trying this time around? That stuff, talking shit about insecure, because I'm not, like, I just want like some of the episodes to like hit a certain way and I'd be like, oh, it was almost there. And so like, I started Game of Thrones recently. I have like really taken the time to be like, oh man, I need to catch up on all this stuff that at one point I probably was too self-righteous to be like, I'm like in like the movement, I don't have time. And now I'm like, damn, I missed out on 8 years of Game of Thrones because I was in the movement. I was wilding. What was I thinking? So just giving myself freedom to like dream and like be human and know that our life is short. Like our life is so short. And I don't want to spend it angry. Like I don't want to spend it angry. So just trying different stuff and still learning.
So my last question before I open it up, Derecka, you wrote an article about how we don't need to be inviting cops into our protests. We don't need to be kneeling with cops. I think that seems like it should be a given, but I guess for some people, you gotta tell them. So I posted on Instagram that I don't really care about having a conversation about quote unquote good cops. And there were some Black law enforcement officers who said, well, what about us? We're hurting too. We're angry too. So what about them? What about the Black cops?
Charlene, you want to start?
I mean, y'all need to get a different job. Like that ain't the move. You need to get a different job. I know the economy is tight, and guess what? Like many of the people who you beat this past week, many of the people who running in and outside of Family Dollars and Walgreens and Targets, they don't have jobs. They don't have fully funded schools. But your job is getting, over $1 billion a year for you to show up and police them. So you need to be a traitor to your profession and pick a different one.
Yeah, if you're not a mole, I don't really know.
Time to go, boss. And I might as well get into, if I could get into the military a little bit, because people always ask about the military and say that that's the exact same thing as the police and stuff like that. So I'll start by saying I come from a family that I have a lot of people in my family who are in the military. And the people in my family, many of them have joined for reasons of poverty. And that still doesn't make it like, oh, this is all good, it's all Gucci. Because I've listened to like veteran after veteran, particularly like the Vietnam War and other wars, just talk about how trash those wars were and how they eventually realized what they were doing and what they had been charged to do. the way that the police operate and the way that the military operates are very similar, but the way that they recruit people, the amount of money that they have, the way that you can be in the military and be like a Walgreens cashier, but being a police officer is not a lifelong contract. It's not something that you are lured into as a high school student and caught up in. Military can absolutely be that kind of situation. It is not oftentimes seen as your pathway out of poverty to become a police officer. You don't automatically get a grant for your housing or for your education automatically just because you're in the police force and all that other stuff. You can leave the police force at any time. It's a job. It's a job. And they don't even treat you like a regular worker. And you are not treated equally. And you actually won't ever be treated equally. So just join us on the other side. And so like you can actually do something else with your career because we have more money for, I don't know, librarians and nurses and doctors and all kinds of jobs that don't include you doing what you're doing right now. And the military got to go too, but that's a whole nother conversation. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I think the only thing I would say I've at least experienced differently is that I have seen, like, at least in St. Louis and in DC, police recruitment heavily in St. Louis public schools as like, if you want to protect and serve your community, it's definitely different because of benefits. And I'm saying this to someone who's in like ROTC and thought I was gonna go to the Air Force Academy. I thought I was gonna be a JAG at one point. But yes, I remember like police like recruiting people at our high schools to be like, there's two sides, you can be the knucklehead on the street who gets locked up, or you can be the person who's keeping people safe from like the knuckleheads. And like that whole recruitment thing is just so unfortunate. The history of Black people in police has been complicated, just like the history of Black people in corporate spaces is complicated, and lost all of it, right? Because we go in thinking like, damn, Black people can be so patriotic and committed to a certain kind of America that just doesn't exist yet. Like we like try to prove that the institution can live up to its values only if it was diverse enough. So there are people who became police officers, decades ago because it was the only way they could try to use force against people who were Klansmen, right? And so it's like that history, like notwithstanding, diversity doesn't make policing less violent. Like it doesn't. So a lot of the same Black officers who are like, what about us, are the same Black officers who inflict violence on Black communities. And in some cases worse, because Black people will sometimes, they don't have the option to claim that it's racist because it's a Black officer. So they're just like, well, you can't they don't know what to do. They don't feel as comfortable filing a complaint because they say, you know what, it's probably hard for them like on their jobs and all this stuff. Like you still have that because you're a Black person. And so it's complicated in the sense that there is like an opportunity for some people to be sympathetic to that. When we think about the kind of violence that Black people in office have done, like towards Black people, a Black mayor bombed move in Philadelphia. Your mayor named Keisha, the Black mayor, she first got in office. One thing that she did was try to raise police salaries by 30% over 3 years. Now you have Black officers in Atlanta knocking Black people upside their heads and tasing them. And so it's just like, well, what about the Black officers? Like, you just can't do both. When all those football players are trying to kneel and put their hand over their heart, I was like, okay, either you gonna pledge to the national anthem or to the flag or whatever, or you gonna kneel. But don't be kneeling with your hand over your heart. Like, come on, like you gotta choose. You gotta pick a side. You can't play that game. And so it's unfortunate because I think people, they don't want to be hurt. They don't want militarized policing. So when you hear militarized policing over community policing and racist policing over people from our community, that other option sounds like a safer, better option. But we have to tell people you have other options, right? Like that's what we have to do. We have to show them and invite them to work with us, because otherwise they're gonna keep defaulting to what feels safer. And that's just, you just can't be the way.
All right, so there has been a question submitted. So I'm gonna go ahead here. Sean Frazier asks, do you believe there is a fear of ex-police retaliation if they are convicted? Basically, the police will revolt for their punishments.
Who we think are in these white supremacist groups? They are in more ways than one. They are the same. Like, there are many ex-cops and current cops who were or are part of the KKK, or were or are part of, what is it, the Proud Boys, or whatever their names are, I don't know. But like, these systems are not completely separate. So of course, yes. But I mean, I'm not more afraid of that than I am of what already is happening.
Yes, yes. And what already is happening is that police are attaching to this good apples, bad apples. They're like, yes, get that one guy. We're all good. Most of us do our good jobs. Remember our videos on TikTok? Remember that was us, right? So I'm also nervous of police just being like, yes, like in police brutality, like lock up that cop is bad, instead of pushing people to question the institution. So there's like the retaliation on one hand, there's the co-option on the other, and we just trying to like we're trying to dodge all of it.
Yeah. All right, next one is from Andre. He asks, Kim, you often say that everyone wants to be an oppressor. I do often say that because most people do have some oppressive tendencies. And as Charlene pointed out, Black feminists fight for things that benefit everybody. It's apparent that white supremacy has convinced people they have something to gain from oppression systems. How do we defeat the notion that being an oppressor is more rewarding than investing in a society that cares about people?
I don't know. When I heard it the first time, the first thing I thought about was like Jay-Z and Black capitalism, and like the impulse for Black people to like rise up, start your own entrepreneurship. Like, you can do it. Like, you know, there was this video that was going viral on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and it was like this little Black kid. He's so cute, and he's just spitting. He's just like, his dad is like, you know, what's finance, what's credit, what's debt, what's this, what's that, and it's just like, I just like, damn, I wish he was talking about socialism, because it would have been so lit. Like, it would have been so lit. And this call I was on last week with Kiese and actually Brittany Cooper, who Charlene mentioned earlier, we were talking about, at least what I said is like, for me to be Black and on the left, or have like working through like leftist politics, it means that all the things I've been sold on as like the prize for Black people, as you become politicized, you be like, dang, I can't have that. So it's just like, I want a house, I want private property, I want X, Y, Z, I want all this land. It's just like, so wait, there's like critiques of private property, or like, oh man, marriage. And it's like, oh wait, it just replicates patriarchy and like benefits and privatizes it. Oh man, send those killer cops to jail. It's like, oh, we can't have jails now. It's like everything that we've been sold on like being interwoven into this American project, you have to like start calling into question. And I'm still working through all of that, still like figuring out like, wow, like all the things I've been told, like this is what it means to live like a good and decent life. I'm constantly being pushed. And so I think inviting people into that conversation, and what I think I've been hearing Charlene and I do throughout the conversation, is just to affirm that. Like, to affirm that. I think oftentimes we jump over the affirmation of what people desire, what we've been socialized to want, what we've been socialized and have been told is natural, right? Like to affirm that that's why people are entering into the conversation, and then just be like, okay, well, like that's one option. We can have a bunch of Black capitalists, but think about the people who are ultimately going to be exploited. Like, do we want the same kind of position? Do we want what white people have, or do we want to be free? And when you polarize people, when you ask them those types of questions, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I don't want what white people have. I don't want banks to sell me credit to go to college. I want free college. I don't want better interest rates, right? So it's like thinking through like what a different world could look like and how we all could benefit from it. I hope that's what we can do. Conversations and affirmation.
I will say people get stuck on the possibility thing, right? Because I think a lot of people are saying, yeah, I want free college and I want free healthcare, but is it possible? I think that's a real roadblock for a lot of people. So if we're not going to be able to get free college, then I'm just going to build the business in, so.
Absolutely. But what I typically try to say is that, what are you doing to make it possible? And it goes back to these two words that have been sticking with me, imagination and will. And so if you're critiquing my imagination, I'm always asking like, okay, like, do you have the will to join me to make it possible? It's like, what are we willing to risk? What are we willing to sacrifice to create that world? And so all these things will remain impossible if we don't have the will to make them possible. Just any significant progress we made in this country is not just because people dreamed about it. because they dreamed and marched and struggled and fought over it, blood, cry, like all of that. And so it's like, yeah, do I want anti-slavery or do I want abolition? Do I want to change the system or do I want Black people to be free? So we've had to ask that question over and over again. Do we, yeah, of course we get what we can take, but we also should be constantly pushing ourselves to get much more.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, Derecka, and wondering if my niece is going to come over here while I'm on this call. It was either I say something to her now or she just comes into the frame. But I agree with what Derecka just shared, and defeating the notion about like what's rewarding in this country. It really requires a sound assessment of like how we got here, constantly like talking with people about like, we can have a conversation about capitalism that's race neutral or gender neutral, and we cannot have those conversations. And it's like, where are the examples of people trying to do this thing, or people who have done them before? Like always keeping a story bank of, ooh, this thing that you said is not possible, it actually happened somewhere. Or they tried it here, and this is the thing that didn't work about it. So what if when we do it a little differently? Or we like, as Derecka talked about, it's like, where's the will? And what I know about Black people globally is that within the Black radical tradition, from our resistance and our resilience and our creative work, growing out of movements against colonialism and slavery, our people have always imagined something different, like have had the nerve to imagine something different, like from the slave hold on the coast of Western Africa to once they landed into this place until when slavery was legally abolished, to post-emancipation, to now, like that's what we do. We imagine different things, and many of us, not all of us, take up the nerve to actually try to create it. And that's a messy process. It's not perfect. And I think I know it's up to every single generation to, like what tech people would say, I guess, iterate on what has been done or what already exists, to keep going and figuring out. This is a long-term thing. This is like a lifetime commitment, many lifetimes, many generations. And it's like each of us has to ask ourselves, how are we going to contribute to that? What is going to be our role? And I wholeheartedly believe that everybody has a role in making that real.
So I did want to end on, I saw a really interesting question that you posed, Derecka. I don't know how much money goes into funding police departments across the country. Do you have any idea what the ballpark is?
It's billions in New York City alone, like billions.
Yeah. So billions and billions of dollars. And if we were to stop, throwing all of that money into these problems that could be fixed elsewhere, we could have so many systems, So I am interested in the question you asked, Derecka, of what would you fund instead of police?
Charlene, I think you should start.
What? Why? I mean, you named a couple things already. Free college for everybody. The wealthy so people who be like, I don't want to pay for wealthy kids. They're not trying to go to your public school. They are really not trying to go to your state school. Wealthy people who are currently wealthy are not trying to go to your college or university for free. Okay? Let's stop that and keep it moving. They're not trying to go to your state school. It's cool. Whatever. So there, childcare, universal childcare. We know that now, everybody should be able to do what makes them sing, and people should, like, there are always going to be roles that people have to, like, take up. Somebody has to actually pick up garbage, right? But the person who's picking up the garbage shouldn't be picking up the garbage because of their race or because of the neighborhood they grew up in, and they should be paid very well to do it. And they should not have to worry about any of the things that they need, right? So every role still needs to be filled. Universal child care. I would also put it in, we do not have universal health care in this country. We don't. That should be a real thing. That's where I would put the money. I would put the money into actually being proactive around the planet not ending in 20 years. I don't know if it may have sped up. I don't know, because of the Rona. And because of Donald Trump, I'm not sure if we have less time now for everything to go to hell. But I would put money into those types of projects that the Green New Deal, the things people have been calling for, the Blue New Deal, all these things.
What's the Blue New Deal?
Oh, the Blue New Deal is focusing on the planet's water, our oceans, our lakes, all of our aquatic resources. So, Liz put that one.
I'm like, when the Blue New Deal come out?
We can talk about that later. But yeah, stuff like that. That's why that's reparations for Black people. I can go all day.
Man, if you look at that thread, education is like the number one thing people say, but it ranges so much. Someone was like, I would just have a bunch of like marijuana farms in every city. And I was like, all right, like, okay. Like I wasn't expecting that one, but yeah, healthcare, education, childcare were like the top ones. It's like over 1,000 responses now. I did it on Facebook too, because I know people hate Facebook. I love Facebook because those are people I actually know. Like, so I get to see like the cousin who I was arguing with 4 years ago about police abolition, like now like say, oh, this, and this. So it's like, it feels like more like personal to me. But yeah, I think when I asked that question, I was just like, wow, like, let's just like try dreaming together. So yes, I echo and agree with everything that Charlene said. I don't even know. I think that I would probably like land cooperatives maybe, or turning Amazon into like a collective's own, like breaking it up and turning it into like collectively owned, like all the things we feel like we can't live without, right? Like, damn, I really like 2-day shipping, but Amazon is pretty terrible, even though they put up a Black Lives Matter thing today. So it's like, wow, how can we break that up and then like actually have like workers own it? What would that look like? Or have these social media platforms like owned by people who get to control like what information is shared, what's kept, to ourselves. Gardens, I think people always talk about gardens, but gardens that can actually like sustain communities and like where people can own. I love what you said, Charlene, about people have to pick up garbage, but it shouldn't be like reducible to like your skin color or race. So like, how do we make sure that people have time like for leisure? What does vacation time look like? Like, should we move from a 40-hour work week to like a 30-hour work week? And so people have more time to like spend with people. I mean, I don't even know, like reading that thread was just so encouraging and so inspiring. We can have like free Wi-Fi or like Wi-Fi that's covered. It's like everyone, we can have like digital access like for people in our communities, There's just, I don't even know, like everything. Mass transit, that was another big one I didn't initially think about. It's like, wow, so we can save the planet, get people across the country and to like their places of work much more efficiently. We can rearrange grids. We can, when we build housing, put like, green space on top of them. Everyone should be able to have access to like go outside. I remember the first time I went to New York City, I was 22. Actually, Charlene, that's the first time we had lunch in person. I was like, I just graduated college. I had like $700 in my bank account. 400 went to a ticket to New York City. I was like, wow. But I was like, how many doors do people have to walk through to get sunlight? It's like you have like the rooms, then you have like the apartment, then you have all the buildings, then you have the elevator. It's like, I just wasn't used to that. And so I was just like, imagine if everyone had access to sunlight and like fresh air and patios and green space, all the stuff that's nice that we deserve to have. So yeah, just so much. Childcare.
Jordan has asked, and I think we will end on this because I think it is important that both of you describe yourselves as Black feminists, yes? Yes. And so Jordan asked in the chat, how come movements always center Black men instead of all Black people? And I think that as Black feminists, that's not really true, but I understand why. If you are coming to movement spaces and seeing the way that we show up for a George Floyd, or seeing the way that we show up for Ahmaud Arbery, that might be the impression that you are coming away from. So I think our real ending question was when I became a Black feminist, when I really started to do my reading, my whole conception of what justice is and what equality is and what we should fight for changed, including how we address the inclusivity question. So our final question is going to be, what is the Black feminist imagining of justice? What does justice look like if we are using a Black feminist frame or a Black queer feminist frame?
For me, justice looks like all Black people, all people, particularly all oppressed people, being able to live within our full dignity, be in right relationship with each other, the other living beings, and the land that we live on. That's what it looks like for me. And it's like, what is it going to take for us to get there? What is it going to take for us to be able to live within our full dignity, for us to be connected with each other, for us to be in right relationship with each other? And yeah, I'll just stop there.
By right relationship, what do you mean?
That means by right relationship, it goes back to many of the things we talked about earlier. It doesn't mean that I don't harm you. It means that actually, if and when I do harm you, that I do the work to say, yes, I did this thing, and here's what I'm gonna do so that I don't do it again. And if it's something that many people are doing, it's people do this thing, what are we gonna do so that people don't continue to do this thing, right? It's not working, it hurts people, it traumatizes people. What are we gonna create so that we can get, and not necessarily I like you, you like me, but this thing is like on a pathway to being settled, if not settled in the first place. It means it requires communication. It requires struggle, I think. And that's not with everybody. I ain't trying to struggle with everybody. I'm not in relationship with everybody. But for us to like, what I'm doing is not destroying your life.
Yeah.
That's
I don't gotta like you.
Yeah.
I love people I don't like. I want you to be free.
Yeah, but as long as I shouldn't be destroying you.
Yes.
In the process.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was looking for this quote that I literally just read. And it's gonna make me mad because I'm not gonna find it. But anyway, so I'm reading this book right now. It's called Communists in Harlem During the Depression. And it is like just blowing my mind. Like just, I'm only in chapter 1, so that's how much it's blowing my mind. I can say like it's blowing my mind. But I got to this book through reading Freedom Dreams again. I reread Freedom Dreams, which is like one of my Bibles. And I be all in people's citations and their footnotes, like what, who, why, who said this, what else they say. And I came across this book. And I was so curious about it because I've noticed that whenever there are like movements for like Black liberation, there's always within those movements people who are fighting, demanding liberation of all Black people, right? Not just Black men. And I'm like finding myself deeply attracted to like what, like why, like where is this impulse? Even for socialist and communist formations, what Black people realize is that even there's this movement, this socialist movement, or this anti-capitalist movement, there must always be this independent struggle for Black liberation. And in those independent struggles for like Black liberation, you see that Black women, Black queer people, they're always trying to figure out like, how can we make sure that, you know, we are like paying attention to all the kind of oppressions that can remain in the event that Black people are free. Because if Black people are like liberated from like, you know, white, heteropatriarchal, heteronormative like capitalism, but like we're still practicing all those other things, it's like, keep it patriarchal, but like make it Black, then that's not like the full liberation that we deserve. So like reading about this, reading about like the Black, like Paul Robeson's wife, Eslanda, like reading about their struggles, reading, you know, Claudia Jones, like why is it that in all these movements, there are always this impulse, you know, to make sure that like all the people who we would call like at the margins are like their demands, our demands are being heard. So I don't know if I appreciate you for like reframing the question that like, it's not that movements always center, like movements are dynamic and people show up with different interests, different demands, different ideas, different imagination. And so it's like, well, I would ask that question, you know, which movements are also like talking about these sorts of things and how can we amplify them and like make sure that we're living up to what they're demanding, which attracted me to this book, which attracted me to, like I said, Claudia Jones and Islanda. So that's one. And in terms of like the Black feminist future, what that looked like for me, I love and agree with everything Charlene said, especially about my relationships. The only thing that I think that I would add, which I, again, am like being pushed to like really think about, is just naming like two things. And part of it comes from the company River Collective. It's just being committed to something that's explicitly anti-capitalist. You know, and I've been struggling with like the socialist thing, because I think that you can have like a socialist movement that's still racist. And so in our struggles, it's very important to have like anti-capitalist for some people that is socialist, for other people that's communist. And I'm doing political education to figure out where am I like falling like in this spectrum.
Anarchy.
What'd you say?
Also anarchy.
And anarchy, exactly. All of these different traditions that we're like bringing to the conversation. So yeah, explicitly anti-capitalist. And another part for me has been around climate, like just being really pushed in my like politics around climate and environmental justice. I think that when people hear police abolition and they be like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. I have felt like that about climate for so long until I read a book and I was like, oh, like, okay, I read The Uninhabitable Earth. Like, I see this is what's going to happen at 4 degrees, at 3 degrees, at 2 degrees, why it matters whether we like implement these 17 things, how many species have died. It just made it so much more digestible. So I would like include like explicitly our relationship to the climate and our relationship to this horrible system of capitalism.
So I would say, Jordan, that patriarchy is a thing, right? Like it still exists, but I do think something that I have absolutely evolved on is, as I have the ability to engage in communities and movements which have divested from that. So instead of spending all of my time as 31-year-old Kimberly being like, y'all don't care about Black women, fuck y'all, the way that like, 22 through like 26-year-old Kimberly would do, now I am deeply invested in communing with other people who share my values, in investing in them and sharing my resources with them and amplifying them. That is how I try to move us away from that.
Mm-hmm. There's always somebody who cares about the thing. It's likely that everybody else ain't paying attention. But whenever I hear people say nobody's talking, that's just not true. It's never true.
Yes, and Kimberly is why the first time you invited me to do this kind of conversation, I was like, can we do it in a conversation with someone else? Because I think like what it means to practice the politics of abolition is pushing back on like their abolitionist experts, or like one of us is like the go-to person. It's like, how are we like always learning together and like resisting like the idea that one of us like has all the answers? And so I'm just so grateful to be in this conversation with you and Charlene. And yes, like who is instead of like ain't nobody. I like, yes.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time enormously. Again, I do think that this is an opportune time to radicalize a lot of people. Everybody ain't gonna get it. Everybody's not gonna get on board. But for people who are invested in radical social change and people who see what is happening now and realize we can't go on like this, okay? What has been before cannot continue to be. I appreciate you for sharing your voices, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. Patrons, members, shout out to y'all. We've had a real patron and member boom over the past few weeks. I understand. Y'all are looking for resources. I'm trying to help you with that. Thank you so much. Your work helps to sustain FORHARRIET. I appreciate you enormously. Sign up for the email newsletter. One day, it'll be in your inbox. Just you wait. Just you wait. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'll see you next time. Bye.